Moving on to Mod 6, I'm going to look at organic chemistry and biochemistry. How many steroids did you eat today? Cholesterol is a steroid, so it's not necessarily androgens that you get for anabolic steroids, for instance. Let's talk about organic chemistry. Organic in science means carbon containing, and carbon is a very unique atom. It can form 4 bonds, and so because of that, a lot of the compounds that we know are organic compounds, meaning they contain carbon. So there are a lot of unique compounds that can happen. And carbon tends to form straight chains. The other ones, silicon, germanium, tin, and lead, they tend to make spherical clusters. I know this because I've done research with carbon in the vacuum chambers. The books and some people might talk about silicon-based life forms. No. My experience, no, silicon-based life forms are not possible. The reason being is that a lot of the structures that we get from carbon, things like cell membranes, they deal with straight chains of carbons, and DNA. DNA is a very long carbon molecule. These types of things, they're not possible with silicon. If you try to make DNA out of silicon, it would be a big blob. Wouldn't work. And there's an old chemistry here. Old chemistry, organic was believed to be living. So, I mean, you can see organic, that it means, organic means of organic, means something living. Well, we used to think that there was some life force called elan vital. That's Latin for life force. This doesn't exist. It's just chemistry. And then inorganic were considered to be rocks. It was dead, not live. And so we're going to classify these different organic compounds. We're going to classify them by what we call their functional group. These are different groups in the molecule, and different groups are going to have different properties. So let's start with the simplest, and a celebrity Jeopardy question is, what type of atoms are in hydrocarbons? Well, hydrogen and carbon only. And there are 3 types: alkanes, alkenes, and alkynes. Alkanes, all single bonded, also known as saturated. Alkenes and alkynes are called unsaturated, and alkenes have 1 or more double bond, and alkynes have 1 or more triple bond. So let's start with alkanes. This is the general formula, and oftentimes we use condensed formulas to have them. So for instance, CH3, CH2, CH2, CH3 is butane. And this chart here at the bottom shows the different numbers for different types of alkanes. So let's talk about them. And now, general trend, the molecular formula, the bigger it gets, the higher the boiling point, the higher the melting point. So start with methane. This is typically used as natural gas. Ethane isn't some natural gas. Usually it's distilled out. And propane used for bottled gas for grills. Butane also used as a fuel. It's a liquid. You can get a liquid at a relatively low temperature. And then the 1 through 4, those tend to be the gases, and then pentane through octane. An octane is the preferred for gasoline, and you can go a little higher, a little lower than octane, but octane is the preferred for gasoline. And then after that, the heavier ones can become diesel fuel and fuel oil, and then the even heavier ones are paraffin waxes. And if you keep on going further, you would get asphalt. So hydrocarbons, so we're back here. You can get isomers. The isomers have the same number and types of atoms but different connectivity. And this is not unique to hydrocarbons. You can have isomers of pretty much anything. It's just the same type of number but different connectivity. Cyclic compounds. So here let me talk about isomers. Here's butane and here's isobutane. So you can see that they have the same number of atoms, but these are connected a little bit differently. And cyclic compounds, they can cyclize. And it's not unique to alkanes. You can have alkenes that way as well. Alkanes and alkynes. Alkanes, 1 more double bond. And by far the biggest use is ethylene. Ethylene is used to make plastics. Polyethylene, a very common one. My MacBook here is made of high-density polyethylene. We'll learn about this later in the plastics section. Also, ethylene makes fruit brighten. Ripen. It smells like rotten bananas. If you ever go and you open up like some fruit and it kind of has this kind of ripe smell to it, I think of it, I associate it with rotten bananas. That's ethylene. You're smelling ethylene. And ethylene is autocatalytic, meaning that the ethylene causes the fruit to ripen faster. So if you've heard the old phrase, one bad apple can spoil the whole bunch, if you have a ripening quickly apple, it will release ethylene, which will make the other apples ripen more quickly, which will release ethylene, which makes things worse and worse and worse. And that's how fruit can ripen. And that's also why you go to the grocery store and sometimes you buy a banana, it's ripe on the outside, you open it up, it's green on the inside. It's because they treat it with ethylene to make it ripen quickly on the outside, and it's not ripe at all. And alkynes have one or more triple bond. Acetylene, or ethine is the technical name for acetylene, used in welding torches. Aromatics, so these are hydrocarbons. They have particular stability, but they're also called aromatics because they smell really, really strongly. Benzene smells really strongly. Most people haven't smelled straight benzene. Toluene, though, I like the smell of toluene. That's the smell that they have in glues. Certain glues, like the cement glues used in models, have toluene in it. So be careful, though. You shouldn't just huff that stuff. But I do like the way it smells. Naphthalene. This here is smells like mothballs. So mothballs have naphthalene in them. And the xylenes, this smells like gasoline to me. Gasoline has a really heavy xylene smell. So if you smell xylene or you smell gasoline, you're probably smelling the xylene that's in it. Chlorinated hydrocarbons, so if you can guess, they're hydrocarbons that have chlorine attached to it as well. These are toxic. These are not used as much, but they have been used in the past. They still methylene chloride, CH2, Cl2. This is a solvent. They still use this. They used to use chloroform, CHCl3, as an anesthetic, to knock patients out. That was in the Civil War. They used that extensively. They don't use that anymore, but still use it as a solvent. And carbon tetrachloride, CCl4, used to be used in dry cleaning. They don't use it anymore for that, but we still use those as solvents. And then CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons. These are still used pretty prevalently. They were used quite a bit, even more so. But because of the ozone depletion, they've been trying to incorporate them out. CFCs are very safe molecules. It's a shame that they cause such environmental damage because they're so safe. Now, let me talk about the different types of molecules, and we're going to go through them. And when you see this R on the chart, R means an alkyl group, or that's an alkane. That's a hydrocarbon with single bonds. So we talked about the first three. Alcohol has an OH, and ether has two alkanes with an oxygen in the middle. Aldehyde has this C double bond O/H at the end of the molecule. A ketone has it in the middle, and ester is sort of like a carboxylic acid. But so carboxylic acid is above that. Then instead of a hydrogen has another alkane on it. Amine has a nitrogen on it, and an amide has a C double bond O attached to an N. So let's start with alcohols. Methanol, or also known as wood alcohol, we use it as a solvent primarily. Thinking about using a fuel replacement, probably not. We'll talk about this later, but it's really hard to beat gasoline as far as a fuel. And methanol, it's toxic, and even more so than gasoline. And it doesn't have as much energy as gasoline, so you'd have to fill up your car more than twice as much in a tank of methanol than you would on gasoline. Ethanol, we do currently use this as a fuel replacement. It's used as solvent and also used as a drug. And it's a very commonly used drug. It's in alcoholic beverages. So ethanol, this is grain alcohol. In polyols, you have more than one OH group. So ethylene glycol, that's antifreeze. Propylene glycol, ethylene glycol has 2 carbons. Propylene glycol has 3 carbons and 2 OHs. And glycerin has 3 carbons, 3 OHs. This is found in fats and can be used in food. So these with alcohol, consuming alcoholic beverages, be careful with this, especially with the laws with driving while intoxicated. In general, if you do choose to use alcoholic beverages, please try and understand what can happen, and be careful not to get too intoxicated, and especially do not go, if you happen to go have too many, please do not go behind the wheel. Moving on to ethers. Usually when people think of ether, they think of diethyl ether. This was also used as a recreational drug, and it was the original anesthetic. It was a dentist that figured this out. So the rich people, the aristocracy, they had these things, the ether, and they were using it. And the dentist, he went to a party, an ether burning party, and he used ether, and he thought to himself, you know what? If I did this to my patients, if I gave them these, they wouldn't care if I was ripping their teeth out. And so then became the birth of anesthetics. So it was used as an anesthetic, and but we don't use it as an anesthetic anymore. But we still use diethyl ether and other ethers as solvents. For instance, some of them are in nail polish. So when the ether leaves, then the nail polish can polymerize. Aldehydes and ketones, these are similar. The aldehyde has it in the end, at the end of the molecule, and the ketone has it in the middle. And these are used, aldehydes, solvents, preservatives, and fragrances. So formaldehyde, for instance, maybe you heard of formaldehyde preserving living things. That's an aldehyde. And also, so from fragrances are aldehydes. These are typically in things like some laundry detergents and some dishwashing liquids have aldehydic fragrances in them. Ketones have solvents. A common one is acetone. That's a nail polish remover to dissolve the nail polish and or methacrylate for acrylic nails. Carboxylic acids, these have this carboxyl group at the end of the molecule, the functional group. And there are some common ones. Formic acid, that's in that stuff that hurts in ant bites and bee stings. Acetic acid, this has got 2 carbons. Formic acid is 1. Acetic acid has 2. Vinegar is acetic acid. Butyric acid's got 4 carbons. Rancid butter has this, as does body odor. So if you smell body odor, you're smelling butyric acid. And maybe you've heard of the chemical GHB. It stands for gamma hydroxybutyric acid, GHB. So, but that's a hydroxy acid, not or it's a carboxylic acid, but it has a hydroxyl group at the front of the molecule. Esters, this is when you take a carboxylic acid and alcohol and mix them together. These are used as fragrances and flavors. So flavors, a lot of times in the fragrance community, flavor means both smelling and taste. And an example of an ester that's commonly in the news now, biodiesel. Biodiesel is an ester. And you make that by taking methanol or ethanol and fat. And so you get an acid, an alcohol, and then you make an ester, and you make water. So let me talk about some of these flavors. So you see methyl butyrate here. You take butyric acid and you hit methanol in it, and then you get something that smells or tastes like an apple. So this is where they get things like the different candy has these tastes, or certain fragrances and things like candles or whatnot. You know, you get these things that smell and or taste like apple. And various things, or pineapple, pear going on. Wintergreen, that's a fun one. Methyl salicylate, the oil of wintergreen, that's also used. It can also be used as a lubricant. So if you ever have a lubricant that smells like wintergreen, also certain muscle creams, they have this methyl salicylate in it. You can smell it if you go around the weight room. I smell that sometimes when I'm lifting weights. People have it on themselves. Amines and amides, so these are organic compounds, carbon-containing compounds that have nitrogen in them. And whenever I think of these, well, amines, when I think of amines, I think of stinky fish. because amines are given off by dead things. As they're rotting, they give off amines. Amides, these are, I tend to think of proteins with this, because the polyamide is a protein. And amines, so if you have one alkyl group, it's first degree, two alkyl, it's second degree, three, third degree, and four, this is called a quaternary amine, or quaternary ammonia salt. These are used as antibacterials, so certain wipes, like they have different companies like Bleach and Lysol make antibacterial wipes. These have those quaternary amines, also sometimes called quat. Also used in fabric softeners, so your dryer sheets that you put in there, they have these in them. So let me show you some of the amines there. There's the different types of amines, and then there's the amide group, so you have different types of amides there. And amine, here's some other common amines. There's amphetamine, so maybe you've heard of different drugs, like the INE means it's an amine, so pseudoephedrine is an amine, amphetamine is an amine, and methamphetamine, the drug, is an amine. These are all amines, and they're just different shapes of this amphetamine molecule, meaning they have different things attached to them. And cadaverine, this stuff smells really bad. If you want to know how to get that smell off of you, if you happen to work around cadavers, use the anti-dandruff shampoo. That will help remove the amine smell from you if you use some sort of anti-dandruff shampoo. Also, a shampoo that has coal tar in it may also work as well. Alkaloids, these are amines that occur in plants. So there are several alkaloids. Some are important, like nitrogen bases in DNA, which we'll talk about later. But there are some that have physiological effects, like caffeine. Caffeine is an alkaloid. And caffeine actually, if you were to taste pure caffeine, it's actually fairly toxic. Caffeine's okay in a small quantity, but in a large quantity it's very toxic. It'll taste very bitter, as will all amines and alkaloids. That's why cold medicines taste kind of bitter, is from the basic taste of the amines in it. But these types of molecules, morphine, caffeine, nicotine, cocaine, they're alkaloids. So we're going to talk about biochemistry. I included this module together with organic because I figured talk about carbon and then talk about the simple molecules and take it one step further and talk about the molecules of life. And we talked about the elan vital. That's not true. So we're going to talk a lot about carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And understand about biochemistry, a lot of molecules have a right hand and a left hand. And if you look at your hands, your right hand and your left hand, they're not the same, but there is a symmetry to them. There's the mirror image. My right hand is the mirror image of my left. And so there is some symmetry to it. And a lot of biological molecules are chiral. And there's a lot of similarities between them. So, for instance, all sugars found here on Earth are right-handed, and all amino acids, which make up proteins, are left-handed. This is true throughout all the species here on Earth. Let's talk about biochemistry. We'll talk about the cells. I have a plant cell here and an animal cell here. And there's a lot of similarities and there's some differences. And you can see here that the plant cell, unlike the animal cell, they have a cell wall, or they may have a cell wall. Animals don't have that. Plants can get their structure from cellulose. Animals get them all from protein. And there is a cell membrane there for a plant cell. Plants also have chloroplasts, which was where photosynthesis takes place. And there's also a vacuole. This is just kind of like a storage closet. You can put things in there like water or wastes, and animals don't have that typically. And there's other functions here. The mitochondria, these give off heat. They burn sugar. The powerhouses. The Golgi complex. This is kind of the shipping and receiving end of the cell. Endoplasmic reticulum, that's where proteins are made. Well, the ribosomes, they make them there typically. And also with the plant cell, you can see the animal cell, there's various different things, very similar to the plant cell, but it's lacking more organelles or small structures in the plant cell. Animals tend to be a little inherently different. That we get more of our structure from proteins than plants do, and we also have we store sugar slightly different ways. But other than that, we're fairly similar. So let's talk about carbohydrates. So first of all, if you look at the term carbohydrate, it means that carbon with a certain number of waters. And if you look at the structure, there are always some carbon to some amount of waters. But that's partially true. Carbohydrates are not true hydrates, but the formulas look like hydrates. So that's where the term carbohydrate came from. And where do they come from? Plants make them. And let's talk about simple ones. Monosaccharide. So if you're a monogamous relationship, you're with one person. That's a monosaccharide, means one saccharide, one sugar. These are simple sugars. So ribose, deoxyribose, galactose, fructose, glucose. These are examples of monosaccharides. Disaccharides, they have two monosaccharides joined together. Sucrose is fructose and glucose joined together. Lactose is galactose and glucose joined together. And maltose is two glucoses joined together. And the different carbohydrates, you can have aldoses that have aldehydes at the end, so glucose is an aldose, and a ketose has a ketone functional group, so fructose is a ketose, for instance. Many sugars cyclize, and so the glucose tends to form this hexagon type formation, and fructose tends to form this kind of pentagon type shape. So polysaccharides, so poly, a polygamist sees many people, so poly means many, so mono means one, polysaccharide, many sugars. And let's talk about the three main types, starch, glycogen, and cellulose. And these are actually connected slightly differently. But starch is how plants store energy. It's one of the ways. Plants can also store energy just like animals do by fatty oils, fats or oils, but also by starch. And animals, we store it by glycogen. And the difference between the molecules is that glycogen is slightly more branched, which means we can get our sugar more quickly. Why do animals need sugar more quickly? Because we move. Plants don't move very much, but animals move more, and therefore we need quicker access to energy. And glycogen, if you've ever run a marathon, I've never run a marathon, but humans run out of glycogen at about 20 miles. After mile 20, I hear it's just very difficult to do a marathon. It's because the individuals doing the race have run out of sugar. And nowadays, of course, we have the gel packs that we take with races. But the original person that ran the marathon, he died. He ran to Athens and he died. And he said one thing before he died, and that was Nike, which is the god of victory in Greece. And you know, we give homage to that with Nike. Nike is really Nike in Greek. Cellulose, plants use this for their structure. This is also a polymer glucose, but these form straight chains. And so then these wrap around themselves, and they kind of form this kind of stainless steel kind of structure. Like if you've seen steel cables, it's kind of like that, but using really thin molecules. And about half of wood is made of cellulose, and cotton is almost pure cellulose. And here you can see here, this is a starch molecule, has a different connectivity than the cellulose. Cellulose is slightly different. We as humans, we can digest starch. We cannot digest cellulose. So cellulose becomes our roughage. It becomes fiber. Lipids. These are fatty compounds. So fatty compounds, and they have carboxyl groups at the end, oftentimes. So fatty acids. And these very often exist as triglycerides. And maybe you've heard the term unsaturated or saturated. Unsaturated means that there's one or more double or triple bond. And for cis and trans, cis means that the groups are on the same side, and trans means opposite sides. And natural oils, the ones you find in nature, they're all cis. But hydrogenated oils like margarine, these have both cis and trans. And people are afraid of trans fatty acids. And the reason why they're afraid of them is because your body needs to change trans fats into cis fats. It puts your body under stress to do this, and therefore it's not as healthy as having cis. That's the reason why. And here, this shows us you have a glycerin, the triglyceride. All fats that are stored in plants and animals are here as triglycerides. And there are some fats that are not triglycerides. So some of the emulsifying agents in milk, for instance, are not triglycerides. But you find many, many of them like this. And this here shows a saturated fat molecule. And besides fats and oils, another type of lipid is a steroid. And steroid skeleton. So a cholesterol, if you eat cholesterol, you're eating steroids. And there's two main types, LDL and HDL. LDL is the bad cholesterol. HDL is the good cholesterol. LDL stands for low density lipoprotein. HDL is high density lipoprotein. So LDL, it's big, fat, and clumsy, and it can sticky. It'll stick to the walls of your arteries. HDL is compact and kind of solid. It's like a snow plow. So an LDL is like the snow. The HDL knocks the LDL out of the way and keeps your blood vessels from getting clogged. What else are steroids used for? So certain hormones, sex hormones for instance, and certain steroids can be endocrine disruptors. What they do, they lower sperm count, and they also can mimic other steroids like estrogen. So let me show you the pictures. And you see here's cholesterol, and it has a very similar skeleton. You see these all have these same shapes. And you can see here, testosterone, here the male sex hormone, and here bottom, the female sex hormones. They're fairly similar. Just think of that the difference between male and female, at least as far as hormones, is only a couple atoms away from each other. A couple bonds too. And women have testosterone in smaller amounts. Men tend to have more, and women have more estrogens than men do in general. Now let's talk about proteins. Proteins, macromolecules. So macro means a big molecule. A protein is a huge molecule, as are a lot of other molecules. We'll talk about DNA later. That's another really big molecule. Proteins are very big molecules, and they have smaller units. They're made of amino acids. So the amino acids are the building blocks. And a special type of proteins, well, most enzymes are proteins. They are catalysts. So remember we talked before about chemical reactions that the enzymes, it's a blob, hooks up, these two blobs come together, and then the chemistry happens and they fall apart, and now the reaction has happened. Enzymes are very, very useful in living creatures. And also enzymes, when you expose enzymes to extremes in heat and or pH, they undergo a change called denaturation. So denaturation means they don't work anymore. They change shape. After they change shape, so if this blob is what happens and it denatures, it change shape, this doesn't work. So then the enzyme doesn't work anymore. So what do I mean? Let's say I take my hand and I burn it to the point that my fingers are all third-degree burns. I have black charred skin on it. Could I move my hand? No, I could not. The reason being is that all my enzymes have been denatured, and all the functions that happen then, they no longer do. That's why we cook our food. We cook our food to denature the proteins, and we do that to make things safer. It makes it safer on our bodies to cook things. We can also cook things by using extremes in pH. So certain cultures use fruit juices to cook fish, for instance. That is another way to cook things. Peptide bond. So here, these are the common amino acids. So all these things, maybe these names will ring a bell. Glutamic acid is one. So maybe you've heard of MSG, monosodium glutamate. That's made from protein. That's why MSG really attacks our our savory sense to understand, to think that we're eating protein. And also, what's another one? Tryptophan. We associate that with sleepiness. That's one of the peptides, or one of the amino acids used to make melatonin. And the peptide bond, so proteins are a type of polymer called polyamide. We'll talk about that later, but these have the amide group in them. And poly, you have many, many amides, and that's how they connect up. So that's the primary structure, is the amino acid sequence. There are also secondary structure. So secondary structure is typically either an alpha helix or a beta sheet. Alpha helix forms a certain helix. Beta sheet kind of wraps around like this. And hair is almost straight alpha helix. And silk is almost straight beta sheet. But those are just, so keratin in your hair, that's a protein that makes up your hair. Most proteins are not just straight alpha helix. Most of them have both alpha helices and beta sheets in them. And then a lot of proteins have tertiary structure. This is a blob. So think primary structure is just the amino acid chain. Secondary structure, it's an alpha helix or a beta sheet. And then a tertiary structure, it's a blob. It's a bunch of amino acids in various shapes to form this blob. And then quaternary structure, this is interaction between the blobs. So hemoglobin has 4 heme groups. So it has 4 of these blobs together. The position of those 4 blobs is the quaternary structure. And I'll show you the pictures here. So this is the alpha helix and the beta sheet, as I talked about before, secondary structure. Now here's a tertiary structure. It's a 3D shape. I call it the blob. So it's the 3D shape. And the quaternary structure is the interaction between blobs. So this is hemoglobin here. Hemoglobin has 4 heme groups in it. Each heme group has an iron center. Now, what else with them? I talked about this already before. This is why we cook our food. This is why badly burned flesh no longer functions. This is also why when the blood pH changes, the organs start to fail, because the enzymes in the organs won't work anymore. Now, changing topics to nucleic acids. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA stands for ribonucleic acid. These are huge. These are huge molecules. And this is how our cells store a lot of our hereditary information. And so there is some hereditary information that's not contained in our DNA. For instance, some is contained in our proteins and some is contained in our mitochondria. So you are slightly genetically closer to your mother than your father. The reason being is that you get your mitochondria from your mother, and that's how they can track people by through generations of females through the mitochondria. Likewise, you can track generations of males through the Y chromosome. And the nucleic acids, they're kind of like the memory center of the cell. Not, I mean, kind of, sort of. I'm making an analogy, but they kind of communicate. The DNA sends its minions, the RNA, the messenger RNA, to do its bidding. And each nucleotide, so the nucleic acids, they're made of smaller units, and each one has a 5-carbon sugar, which is either deoxyribose or ribose. What's the difference between deoxyribose and ribose? Deoxyribose has 1 less oxygen. So deoxyribose, 1 less oxygen than ribose. And a phosphate group that joins the two, and then a nitrogen base. And here are the different nitrogen bases. And DNA and RNA both have adenine, guanine, and cytosine. DNA has thymine, RNA has uracil. Here's deoxyribose and ribose, and you can see deoxyribose has 1 less oxygen, and there's the phosphate group between them. So DNA has those 4, RNA has those 4. And with DNA, guanine will only pair with cytosine. Likewise, adenine will only pair with thymine. And the same thing is true with RNA, except adenine will only bond with uracil. Now, the reason being is hydrogen bonding. Guanine and cytosine, there are 3 spaces where they will hydrogen bond. Adenine and thymine, there are 2, and they're arranged in space such that guanine can only bond with cytosine. It cannot bond with another guanine, will only bond with cytosine. That way, DNA has an automatic backup to itself. It has a backup to it in case there's damage to one, the body can repair it. So let's talk about human DNA. Each DNA, we have 2 strands, but this is relatively uniform. This is uniform for everything, but there's 2 strands, and they're twisted to form a double helix. And you've probably seen this before. And we have 46 DNA strands known as chromosomes, or we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. So the idea is that DNA sequences, so the different ones make up genes, series of genes, genes make up the chromosomes. And one of the pairs of DNA is the coding, the other one is a backup. And these segments of the DNA strands, we call them genes, so G-E-N-E-S. And DNA, what can it do? It can replicate. And this is important because cells divide, cells reproduce, and each cell is a copy of the other, so DNA needs to be able to replicate itself perfectly. It can store information, and it can direct synthesis of proteins. So this is where DNA is important. So DNA contains the information on how to make proteins. So and the proteins are the ones that do all the work. So DNA is kind of like the director in that sort. Well, it says how to make the proteins, and then the proteins do the work. So it's not quite like a computer, but kind of, sort of. And DNA can also mutate, and that's how traits can change over time. So here's the DNA, and you can see the double helix, and you can see how the DNA can unzip and then grow. So you can form 2 new chains, and this is called replication. So the DNA replicates to form a new one, and then and this is shown kind of in a puzzle shape. It's really due to the 3 bonding sites and orientation of space of guanine and cytosine, and the 2 sites for adenine and thymine. RNA is a single-stranded, so DNA is double-stranded. RNA is single-stranded, and then what it does is it takes information from the DNA. The DNA unzips, and then mRNA, messenger RNA, forms on the DNA. The mRNA then goes to transfer RNA, and then it tells the transfer RNA which amino acid to bring to the ribosomes, which would then make the proteins. So this is what happens. You have the mRNA forms off the DNA, and then it brings the transfer RNA and then the ribosomes, and then it makes the proteins, and the proteins are the ones that do the work in the cell. And human genome, we use human genome. This is one of our fingerprints. Each person has his or her own unique genetic code. And you can also tell how related people are. Father, son, brothers, cousins, these types of things, you can tell from the human genome. These show certain inherited diseases. Certain diseases can be passed through families, and it can show up in the human genome. Also can be used for criminal identification, and certain things like different types of bodily fluids left behind in different crimes can be used to identify certain individuals. Recombinant DNA, so this is more of a controversial thing. Almost everything except for some retroviruses, HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, this is a retrovirus that has RNA instead of DNA, but pretty much most things have DNA as a primary hereditary material, and we can take DNA from certain animals and plants and add them to each other. So, for instance, insulin and human growth hormone are made by taking bacteria and adding those genes to them, and then the bacteria become little insulin factories. So that's how insulin is made for diabetics. And then we can take viruses to infect people with specific genes. So this is called gene therapy. So if you want to get rid of a certain hereditary disease, you can infect people with these different genes. Will infect them with the viruses that will carry the genes in. And this is relatively controversial. It's where this is going. People could start to be able to design their own children. So If I'm blonde haired and blue eyed, say I wanted to have a child that had red hair or brown hair, or I get sunburnt a lot, and so let's say I want to have my child that have olive colored skin. So maybe I could do this. We don't have the technology to do that yet, but it raises some ethical concerns. So this is what we may have in the future, but I leave that up to you to make your own conclusions on the ethics of that.